Hey everybody, it's Mr. Miller back here. This is Tuesday the 21st of April. Tuesday the 21st of April. This is for Regents U.S. history. So we're going to continue on today with our notes in topic 15. So if you have those out, hopefully you do. We're going to pick up with number 10, which is where we had left off yesterday. I guess we left off at the end of 19 or at the end of number 9 yesterday. So we're going to pick up with number 10 today and hopefully get through number 13. That's kind of the goal. So let's go ahead and jump right into this and get it going. Okay, number 10 here. Number 10 is if you remember, we're talking about the Red Scare. We're talking about this time period right after World War II in which America is kind of worried about communists, and America's worried about communists infiltrating our government and taking over areas of our society. So we had talked the other day, I guess yesterday, about the Red Scare and how there were the House Un-American Activities Committee, HUAC, and then there was also the Hollywood 10. We had mentioned both of those examples. Now, we've got two specific examples that we got to talk about, and then we've got to get into kind of the biggest classification of a witch hunt during this time period, which would be McCarthyism in number 11. So we've got to talk about two specific examples here in number 10. So let's start with Alger Hiss. Alger Hiss. That is a guy's name. It's kind of a fun name. Sounds like a snake, but it is Alger Hiss. That's his name. Alger Hiss happened to be a Democrat. He was a high-level government worker during the FDR administration in the middle of the Great Depression. So Alger Hiss was actively involved in the New Deal and very strong New Deal Democrat, working on many New Deal programs as well as helping organize the United Nations. So Alger Hiss, pretty high-profile guy at this point. People know about him. Some people know about him. But he's a high-profile guy. People know who he is, more or less. Now, he gets accused of being a spy for the communist government in Russia or in the Soviet Union. He gets basically there was, and this is how most witch hunts go. If you remember from the Salem witch trials or the Crucible, you have people who claim that other people were witches, and usually it's somebody who was claimed to be a witch themselves who ends up doing all of this blaming. So this is what happened here. There was a guy who was a former communist who said, I'm not a communist anymore, but you know who is? Alger Hiss. And so they kind of set off this big frenzy to get Alger Hiss. He ends up standing trial, and this is in this slide here on the left is Alger Hiss with the contemplative look in his eyes, but he is standing trial there in front of the Senate, I believe, at this point, or not the Senate, the House of Representatives. He ends up being convicted, even though he might or might not have been innocent. We don't really know, but he ends up being convicted anyways. And that just kind of leads more people to be scared about the fact that there may or may not be communists infiltrating the American government. So that is kind of a fear that everybody is realizing at this point. Now, there is another example of this that happens here in the same slide. The Rosenbergs. The Rosenbergs were two individuals. They were married. Their names are Julius and Ethel. Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. So Julius and Ethel Rosenberg are pictured there on the right of this slide. So Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were actively working on the atomic bomb project in America. So they had access to information that may or may not have been classified. It was pretty highly classified. So they had access to that information. Somehow the Soviet Union ended up getting information about our atomic bombs, and we ended up, the United States government ended up blaming, or somebody in the government blamed the Rosenbergs for leaking that information to the Soviets. Now, again, this is all hinging on the testimony of somebody who was a spy, a former spy, a confessed spy, similar to what happened to Alger Hiss. Rosenbergs say, no, we're innocent, we're innocent, we're innocent. Eventually they get found guilty under questionable courtroom drama, I guess you might say. Questionable details. They get found guilty and get sentenced to death. They are electrocuted in 1953. So the Rosenbergs end up dying as a result of this in the midst of this Red Scare. Did they or did they not do it? I don't know. Nobody really knows. It's hard to say. Now, one of the things to mention here, and this is kind of just a side note, something that goes on in my head oftentimes, is I think of things, and I think of things that would be good fits for certain things. I'll explain what I'm trying to say, because all that was probably very vague. Let me drop this down. So Alger, no, I actually want this. So this title here, Alger Hiss and the Rosenbergs, and me telling you this means that you're not going to do anything with this, because now I have it on tape that I've told you all this stuff. I think that this would be a great name for like a heavy metal band, Alger Hiss and the Rosenbergs. Maybe not a heavy metal band, maybe like an indie band, alternative maybe, but Alger Hiss and the Rosenbergs. That's a great name for a band. And it's, it doesn't need to be anything about communism. It's just a fun name. I like the name. I thought of this a couple of years ago, and I said, you know what? I'm going to turn that into the name of this slide, and then I'm going to say, I think this is a band name, because it really is. Alger Hiss and the Rosenbergs. It's a great, great, great band name. Okay, that's all I got to say about that. Thanks for indulging me. Now, if I see any pop-up Alger Hiss and the Rosenberg bands out there, I will come at you with I don't know, maybe legal lawsuits. I might be forced to. You never know. I could. I also could not. It depends on how things go. So I don't know. I guess don't take advantage of my details that I'm giving you right now. I'm letting you into some secrets here. So if I ever start a band, it will be named Alger Hiss and the Rosenbergs. Okay. Anyways, on to number 11. The rise and fall of McCarthyism. McCarthyism centers on this guy pictured over here. His name is Joseph McCarthy. Okay, Joseph McCarthy. Joseph McCarthy is a senator from, I believe, Wisconsin or Minnesota. Wisconsin, I think, is right. Senator from, I don't know, some upper Midwestern state. So he is a senator. He is, I don't know, an interesting guy, but he is responsible for the biggest part of this witch hunt. Basically, what happens is he ends up going in front of the press, going in front of the media, and he says, I have a bunch of information about communist spies that are in the United States State Department. The State Department is the one that oversees foreign affairs, details with other countries. And McCarthy goes up there. He says, I know 205 communist spies working currently in the State Department, 205 of them. And so he ends up like in this picture, as it shows here on the far right. He's holding up this piece of paper, this packet that's got all these people's names in it. And so he says, I've got all these names. Put me in control of a committee to be able to convict these people. So McCarthy actually ends up never proving the fact that he has people who are communists. He ends up, when people question him, they say, oh, well, show us the list. And he's like, oh, okay, but I removed some people that I found out weren't communists. So now we're down to like 100 people. And then, oh, wait. There's more people on here that I'm not sure, so I'm going to remove them. Eventually, he never actually produces any substantial list. So it's all kind of just based on fear as the big part of it. And that's what McCarthyism kind of comes to be defined as. And this would be something that I would write down. McCarthyism is kind of nowadays used to say, reckless charges, reckless statements that are not based on any factual evidence at all. They are reckless charges that can't be proven. If I was to if we were back in school and I was to say, go to Mr. O'Leary and say, I think that half of all the people in my classroom at this very moment are communists, and I've listed the names of the people who I think are, because they look at me the wrong way, or they don't do their homework, so that makes them communist or whatever. That would be reckless and that would be unprovable. So I can't really prove that you're a communist. That just isn't something that I can do. So that's kind of what McCarthyism ends up becoming. Now, McCarthyism ends up prompting a lot of fear here in the early 1950s, because if McCarthy states your name as being a potential communist, good luck trying to survive that one, because McCarthy had a lot of power and a lot of control and was able to say kind of whatever he wanted to say. And if he said it, it was pretty much taken as fact. So good luck if he ends up claiming that you're a communist. Leads to a fear of McCarthy and a fear of crossing him, a fear of a fear of doing something that might put you in trouble with McCarthy. So a lot of people didn't want to call him into question, even though this was questionable stuff that he was doing. Didn't want to question him because, it's Joseph McCarthy. We can't cross him. Now, ultimately, one group ends up kind of being unafraid of crossing him. McCarthy ends up, I'm too far actually here. Sorry, not into number 12 yet. I'm sorry. McCarthy ends up going after the Army. I thought I had a picture of this, and I don't. McCarthy ends up going after the Army and saying, there's a lot of high-ranking military officials in the Army that are all communist, and the Army is filled with communists. So what ends up happening? The Army goes on, or many Army officials, military officials, get put on trial in front of the Senate and the House. And all of these hearings, interestingly enough, let me go back to this picture here. All of these hearings are televised. So you can see this picture here on the left. We've already looked at this before, but you've got these television cameras here and the bright lights. And all of these television hearings all these hearings with the Army or Army McCarthy hearings, they call them, were televised. And what the American people see is, wow, we've got soldiers up there who risk their lives for us. And we've got this senator who's sitting there calling him communist, and he has no facts at all. So a lot of people end up saying, this is stupid. Why are we letting this guy control this whole thing? So McCarthy ends up losing a lot of his support in 1954 when he goes after the Army. And as a result, ends up kind of shrinking back into the shadows and kind of giving up giving up the quote unquote witch hunt. He's not giving up as a senator. He gets to stay on as a senator for a handful more years, but he's kind of done. I'm sorry for the yawn. He's kind of done being kind of done with his masquerade here, with his witch hunt. So that is what he does. McCarthyism starts fast and ends quickly as well. Okay, number 12, and we'll get through number 12 and 13, then we'll be done. Number 12, military changes in the GI Bill. Military changes to start with. One of the main things that happens right after World War II is over is Harry Truman, the president at the time, ends up passing a law that desegregates the military, desegregates the armed services. Basically what that means, everybody, regardless of your race, can serve in the military, and you could serve right alongside everybody else. So there are no segregated units. There are no discrimination examples in the military anymore, at least not officially. So you would have the military be desegregated in 1948. So that's an important step here. Now, we're going to get into the civil rights era soon, so we'll get there eventually. Now, next up here, as veterans returned back from World War II, and also, I guess, from the Korean War to some extent, but mostly from World War II. We've got 16 million veterans who come back to America. They need to get reintegrated into society. The problem is a lot of their jobs that they had have been kind of taken over by other people. And those other people are maybe not going to leave their jobs when they get there. A lot of women who started working in World War II kept those jobs after World War II. A lot of African Americans who took jobs in World War II kept those jobs after World War II. So a lot of veterans, we kind of feel this burden to take care of them as they come back and integrate them back into society. So we end up passing, as a country, passing what's called the GI Bill. GI stands for General Infantryman, which would just be a soldier. So the GI Bill is just kind of like the soldier bill. Now the GI Bill tends to help out veterans and businesses. If a veteran wants to run a business, things like that. It would give out. I'm so sorry. I'm very, very sorry for that yawn. That's number 2 for the day. I apologize. The GI Bill ends up giving out benefits to veterans, giving out unemployment benefits if they can't find a job, giving out business loans if they want to start their own business, giving out home loans if they want to purchase a house. So we've got veterans who are kind of taken care of here. The biggest part of the GI Bill, or at least the part that we mostly remember it for, is an example of kind of government paying veterans to go to college, or at least paying for veterans to go to college. So that kind of idea is an important idea. It's still around today. The GI Bill is. If people end up going into the military, you can, if you serve enough time, you come out and you are able to go into college debt-free for the most part, and learn whatever you want to learn, really, get a full degree. So the GI Bill, at this point, 8 million veterans end up using this GI Bill. I think that's over the course of the time of this GI Bill being in place. I am forgetting what I wrote down with this statistic, so I apologize for that. But the GI Bill, moral of the story, very popular idea here. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to number 13. Now, business and labor in the 1950s, okay, and then tomorrow we'll get into some of the changes in terms of what they call mass culture and how the culture is shifting around in the 1950s. So business and labor in the 1950s. Here we have an example of a lot of businesses kind of taking off after the Great Depression and after World War II, specifically service businesses. Services would be something like, it's not a manufacturing business. It's not a manual labor business. It's a service. It's like a restaurant, or it's a store. It's a department store. It's an insurance agency. Shout out Kilburn Agency. It is, so it's these white collar, I guess more white collar jobs. Not all of those are white collar jobs, but services, not so much providing farming or things like that. That wouldn't be a service job. Services could be blue collar jobs, pictured in this slide over here, where you've got all these people in their outfits for their jobs, or in their wardrobe for their jobs. You've got mechanics, you've got teachers, you've got carpenters, you've got construction architects, you've got doctors and nurses in there. So you've got a lot of different people represented in there, and all of those would be services. So like I said, we're moving away from manufacturing a little bit in America. We find that we can manufacture things cheaper elsewhere, and we can make a lot of money doing that, but we need to still have services. People are going to need their cars repaired. People are going to need their kids taught in school, or vicariously through a webcam like is currently happening to you. People are going to need insurance. People are going to need food at a grocery store. So we end up, people are going to need places to put their money, like banks. So we end up transitioning as a country away from manufacturing jobs and away from farming jobs in large numbers over to service jobs. Now, businesses, some businesses that are popular at this time that are just starting out and growing pretty highly, businesses like McDonald's, businesses like Walmart, Both of those businesses started out very strong or very small in the I think they both started in the 1950s, maybe slightly before that. But they all started back at this point and grew out of really nothing, and then grew into these massive chains that we know them as today. And these businesses are doing really, really well. Again, number 3, I should be done by the next time I have to yawn. I'm sorry. These businesses are doing really, really well in this new economic environment. So these businesses are doing pretty well. So what we end up with is another piece that I need to mention here. That's a change in unions or labor, and it is called the Taft-Hartley Act. The Taft-Hartley Act, that green one right there. So the Taft-Hartley Act is an example of a law that's passed to regulate labor unions. Okay, labor unions were very strong at this point, and they are starting to be cracked down upon in some cases. So this Taft-Hartley Act outlaws what is called a closed shop. Okay, closed shop. Now, a closed shop is it's just another word for a business that is basically only allowed to hire union members. The union is very strong, and only union members can join, and you have to be in the union to work there. Okay, so this Taft-Hartley Act outlaws the closed shop and makes it so that some of the power that went into unions kind of comes back to the business owners at this point in a little bit, not in large numbers, but somewhat. So the closed shop is kind of outlawed by this Taft-Hartley Act. What you end up with here is this picture over here. This would be a labor union meeting, a big meeting, and it says Mr. President vetoed the Hartley-Taft slave labor bill, basically saying that this Taft-Hartley Act would equate to slave labor in their mind, because people would be able to work for very cheap because they didn't have to join the union, and the union provides better wages for people, or at least fights for better wages for people. So they call it the slave labor bill there, because it would allow for businesses to hire non-union members, which union people don't like. So that is what it is. Okay, so I think I'm done there. I've got 2 essential questions that are posted in the assignment separate to this. So go ahead and look there, and you can find those and answer those right now. So I will be back here tomorrow. We'll wrap up topic 15 notes and then go on to something else for Thursday. So I will see you guys back here again tomorrow. See you then.